Is using AI putting your business at risk? We've seen the big AI companies expand into more vertically integrated offerings. Now, remember how Amazon analyzes sale data to determine which products Amazon Basics should offer? What happens when the big AI companies do the same with your conversations? However, without leveraging AI, your business is at a massive disadvantage. So the solution? Sovereign AI systems. On episode 80 of Tool Use, we're joined by Max McCrea. He's the founder of Greyhaven, a company that's going to solve this issue. So we're going to discuss how to maintain control of your private data while still benefiting from AI, when to use open source AI versus still relying on the big models, and we're going to cover architecture decisions to improve your systems that rely on open source models. So please enjoy this conversation with Max McCrea.
I became very disillusioned with social media. I think the nail in the coffin. I was already like not. I was seeing a lot of the things that I'd seen in the gambling world that I thought were not my favorite thing to see happening in social media. Like a lot of these like corporations, studying these like dopamine feedback loops and implementing these patterns that get people really addicted. And I have ADD. And so I'm like, I'm a especially strong target for those types of loops, right? Like it's very easy for me to get sucked in and completely absorbed by these like short dopamine loop things. There's a reason I was a professional poker player, right? I really didn't like the direction in general. And then I also really didn't like the extreme irresponsibility that I saw from, there was this like genocide in Myanmar, I think, that happened that was organized on Facebook, and Facebook's response to it was very like, didn't seem like they took the weight of that kind of responsibility as seriously as you would expect somebody to,
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, taking a step back here, I don't think that this thing is helping me. And I also don't think it's helping the world. So I'm just going to opt out of that whole thing. And then that, I'm the type of person who goes kind of hard. So that thought process led me to, what, I should be the one in control of all of my systems. It shouldn't just be like my social systems. It should be like, I've got this computer, and I became like a Linux user, and I became, an open source person. I learned about all these cool open source tools, and I learned about building them myself and all this stuff. And so then when we started our company, I thought, let's see if we can self-host everything. Let's just try to do that. Let's try to do everything in like the most secure, self-hosted kind of way. And part of the thought process was I justified it as a business thing where I was like, we're trying to start a poker company, and security is going to be really, really important. If we're going to be handling people's funds, and we're going to be like targets of hacking and blah, blah, blah. And so if we design all of our internal processes from first principles to be secure, and we're the ones in control. I'm not like offloading this stuff to some third-party SaaS solution who, they're I always saw a principal agent problem in using SaaS solutions where it's like, a data breach for the SaaS business is bad for their PR. It's bad for their like reputation, but it's not the same, right? It's not the same cost as the cost to the person whose data was lost. So I always thought it'd be much more secure to host our own thing. And so we did that for years. And it was frankly, definitely not the best business decision at the time. I would say the fact that we were like really an engineering team who was good at this kind of thing made it possible, but not advisable. There was something that were good. Like we used Zulip from the very beginning, and I think Zulip is better than Slack and always has been better than Slack. And self-hosting Zulip's not hard, and it works really well and super mature. So that I would say was justifiable, but most of the stuff that we did, we put a lot of bespoke processes into place that didn't necessarily have to be as bespoke as they were. But I would say that has very much changed over the years. And first of all, like open source tooling has just gotten so good. There are projects like Coolify, for example, that you can use that make the process of hosting a bunch of open source systems on a single machine like pretty doable. It abstracts away a lot of the annoying complexity behind the DevOps process of hosting your own systems. And then also language models especially just make it like, oh my God, it's I think the power of language models for coding has become a little bit overstated. The power of language models for DevOps, oh my God, it is such a life changer. Because in DevOps, a lot of it just comes down to like, looking up who else had this one weird problem with this one thing and figuring out whether that's the problem that you actually have. And if it is the problem that you actually have, it's easy to fix. And if it's not, go and find the other person on the internet who responded, And every once in a while you have a problem that nobody else has ever run into. But if you're using, relatively popular solutions, that doesn't happen very often. With language models, that process is like almost automated, right? Like there's very, very little that the language model can't find that has been solved by somebody else, right? So I guess I'm not really answering your question about what is sovereign AI. Sovereign AI is this idea that we're in control of our systems and we're making every decision explicitly. We've built sovereign AI is about architectural decisions where you're not locking yourself into any one pattern. You're not locking yourself into any one vendor. And ultimately you have the power to change anything about any part of your system. Right. And so if a new model comes along that's just way better at a certain workflow than before, then swapping it out is really easy because you've built the choice into your architecture, right? You've abstracted away the model provider. If you realize that, in our case, for example, we realized at one point that AI generated summaries from our video calls. And so we built our own video calling platform that transcribes the calls, on models that we're hosting ourselves. I always felt that, that was one thing that absolutely was a must. Like there's such an expectation of privacy intuitively around calls with people. And I just want to be able to speak freely and not be worried that like some system administrator somewhere has like access to these like calls where, who knows what I said in there. At one point we noticed, for example, that our, post-call summaries were just way, way better if we took the context of the call and put it into the context window of the model that was doing the summary, right? And so it was actually it made much more of a difference than the quality of the model itself. So for example, if we, we decide we're going to do this, we're going to record this podcast together, just for, as an example, you can imagine if we were doing this on our video calling platform called Reflector, and we had an email back and forth about what we were going to talk about and why. And then I had a conversation with maybe some of my engineers about, hey, what are some cool things that we're working on that I could potentially talk about? And then we have the call, right? The context of the email history and the context of the conversation that happened on Zulip can be linked to the call, and then the transcript and the conversations that led up to the call can all be fed in the same context window to a language model, which now has this, this framing for the conversation. And so the summaries are way, way more useful. And I would say like, it's really night and day, right? The difference in the quality of the output, of course, is not something that I would feel super comfortable handing over to a third party, right? Because now we're talking about like my private email, my internal chat, and my calls with people all being, like agglomerated into a single context window. Some people are just like, screw it, Google owns my life. And that's, that's a choice. But, for me, it's really important that I have the choice to not to do it that way. And I found that in practice lately, it's more and more an advantage to be able to just grab, these other pieces of data that are contextually relevant to a certain workflow and just connect them without even having to think about it, right? I don't need to think about what are the security implications of doing this because it's happening inside of a container that's run on my machine. And we've already thought about all the different security practices around doing that, right? We've already spent much time thinking about, okay, like what are the capabilities that we want to be able to hand a given workflow, and what kind of network access do we want to give it and why and what. Somebody's already thought about all that infrastructure level decision, or has already made all those infrastructure level decisions. So now if I want to just connect some things together and create a custom workflow that's pulling in a bunch of private data, I can just do it and try it and see how it works. And then I can, measure it against, I can create a test set based on private data that are like, I don't want to share with anybody. I can do that on my own machine. So that's kind of, that's the idea behind sovereign AI, right? Is the idea is I want to build systems where I can just make whatever decision I want, and have a full expectation of privacy if I need it, and And, if I don't need it, then I don't, right? So, for example, if I want to use Claude instead of our self-hosted model for a workflow because, the performance is important. And in a lot of cases where we're doing coding, for example, Claude is just so far better than the open model that the trade-off isn't worth staying with a local model or even model that's running on our own private GPU node. In those cases, I use Claude. And in the cases where the difference is not that significant, then I use a local model. And there are cases and there are different levels of privacy that I'm comfortable with, right? Like if I'm running stuff that is agglomerating a bunch of private conversations that I'm having with my wife about our kids and my email correspondence with business people and things that I'm talking about in calls, and I don't know what's in there, and I don't want to have to think about what's in there, then I'm using a local model. But if I have a system that was filtering out the private conversations beforehand and curating the data set to make sure that the stuff is okay, maybe then I'm comfortable with a different level of privacy. And then in other cases, whatever, this is just some code and we'll consider it to be a special secret sauce IP that needs to be locked down. And so Claude could see it, who cares? And so that's what we built for ourselves. And, of course, that's what Greyhaven and, I'm trying to productize that.
Yeah, I love that. I can't wait to dive more into Greyhaven, but there's a few things I definitely want to touch on that you brought up. So about the idea of having these note takers and meeting correspondence, it really helps when people use it to be engaged and be able to be a part of the conversation instead of like splitting their attention between taking notes and having the conversation. A very popular tool is Granola. And when Granola did their year-end Wrapped, there's actually a few people I talked to who were surprised at the amount of insight that Granola could have just from listening to their conversations. Because when people use these tools, they think, oh, I just want to summarize a meeting. But it's picking up on your mannerisms. It's picking up on the little chit-chat you have ahead of time. So they're actually collecting a lot of information. But one reason I found that people seem to like it is the context management that you mentioned is kind of automated. They take care of it. You just have to hit play. So could you go into a little bit of detail for this context management automation and just like the thought process you put in there, how other people can have it, maybe for their own at-home personal system, if they have an Obsidian Vault set up, how they can kind of set up workflows where they don't have to, for every single task they want, try to copy and paste from different locations to get this higher quality output.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what we did for ourselves, right? We came up with the idea that each person should have their own personal kind of index of their own personal data. The idea is that there's going to be some combination of private conversations that I'm having and then conversations that I have that are, company owned because they're happening on company servers or whatever, and then public stuff that I'm having that I'm a part of, right? I want to be able to just bring all these things together and be able to process them, but they need to be marked, right? Where I'm like, okay, this is something that I consider to be private, and so I'm going to just only use it within the scope of this type of workflow or automated activity, right? Once you have that ability, once you can bring all the pieces of data together into like a single index, and you can mark which things are considered private or not private, and you can do this in a number of ways. You can do it, you can have a language model do it, you can do it with a rules-based system, you can do it with a hybrid system. But once you have that, it becomes pretty easy to then automate, whatever you want, right? Language models are very much make it, or let's say to get to a prototype of whatever you use, it's very easy. So you can very quickly just be like, okay, I really want, the fact that I was having, I had this email back and forth. I really want that to be involved in the process of having a post-meeting summary, right? Or, it'd be really great if after we hop on a call to discuss this issue, if the GitHub issue were updated with the conversation that we just had, right? These are things that require the context, right? The language model needs to know that the issue exists. The language model needs to know that you were talking about the issue, and then the language model needs to know and it needs to have the power to update the issue itself, right? But once you have a system that has those connections all made internally, you could then design whatever workflow you want. And we actually use n8n a lot internally to automate these kinds of workflows when they are kind of visual workflows. And then I also, I have, we're actually, maybe we'll open source this. We've recently built this thing that we're calling Greywall for running agent loops in like a software-defined sandbox, where I can connect it kind of I have all these default MCP connections and stuff like that. And I can spin up, for example, an instance of Goose or OpenCode, or even OpenClaw if I wanted to. But in what with the UX is basically that I can like run one of these commands, let's say like I run OpenClaw, right? And what it'll do is it'll look at all the network connections that OpenClaw is trying to make, and then it'll create a bunch of security rules saying like, hey, these are the things that OpenClaw is allowed to do, and then I can check and say, yeah, I'm okay with OpenClaw having these connections, yes or no. And then there'll be like this software-defined sandbox that OpenClaw will run inside of, and then if it tries to do something that's not, it hasn't been, in advance authorized to do, it'll be blocked, right? And so this massively reduces the attack surface, right? Where I can feel much more comfortable than otherwise. I mean, I remember the first time I discovered Aider like 2 years ago, and I was like, this seems like I'm a little uncomfortable running this thing that's gonna like have the power to execute code, but then it's also communicating with a thing that's going to send it code and it's going to execute that code on my machine. And I was like, no. And I like wrote this little, I wrote this little Docker wrapper to run it inside of a container environment. And I showed it to one of my engineers and they were like, oh, that's cool. And we built this little utility, and that's the origin story of this whole thing. And I always thought, like the security conscious me was just like, that's really icky. Right. And so, I could see the potential in it, right? Like the first time I used Aider, I was blown away. I think I used it for the first time right after DeepSeek dropped, and somebody, was like promoting how great DeepSeek was, and they showed how the Aider polyglot benchmark had been like it jumped up by X% if you used DeepSeek as the architect model, and they had like a separation between the architect and implementer model, and DeepSeek was just way better as an architect model. And I was like, oh my God, that's incredible that it like jumped so far in this like weird benchmark. Let me learn more about what this benchmark is. And then, I wanted to try it. But immediately as soon as I looked a little bit closer at what it was asking me to do, absolutely not. I have nothing. I am not going to download and install a binary with my user permissions on my operating system that's going to call out to some model and ask it what it's going to execute on my machine. Like that, no, that's a terrible idea. Like, why would you ever do that? That seems really dumb. And so, I had to have a system to be able to do this and feel safe about it. And so now, now I've gotten to the point where I can take one of the, whatever thing drops, and there are these cool things dropping all the time. Like I swear on GitHub, if you just look at what's trending, like there's like a new, really cool, interesting project trending every day that is doing something amazing. But like for whatever reason, the move fast and break things culture of engineering has reached this like fever pitch where like everybody's just like, screw it, I don't care, I'm just running this thing. I mean, the number of people who got excited about OpenClaw blew my mind. I was like, to me, this looks like if I were to try to orchestrate a cyber attack on the Western world, I don't think I could do as much damage as OpenClaw. I would take some incredible 0 days to go out there and create all the vulnerabilities on all these machines that people just willingly installed on their computers. And so, yeah, like I wanna be able to mess around with a thing like that, because I want to be able to partake in all of the really fun new features that AI is readily making available. And by the way, they're always overstated. The reality is always like some janky version of whatever thing you were promised on the internet. But I want to be able to try those things and get and stay up to date with what the newest, hottest stuff is and how well it's working. But I can't do that in a way that's compromising my entire system, right? I said that one of my kind of operating principles is that I want to take into account the fact that I'm a part of a system, right? Like we're all part of the society and we all play a part in it, and I take that responsibility seriously, and I think it's irresponsible to run extremely insecure software. on my machine. Like I'm creating an attack vector for people to do bad things. I'm enabling the bad actors, right?
Love the rant. OpenClaw was another one that got me as well. One of the most popular skills was malicious. It turned out they tried to do a test on how much it could prevent exfiltration, and it scored 2 out of 150. Like, it's absolutely abysmal. And one of the update mechanisms is just like ping this URL and download the script and install it. And all you have to do is man in the middle of that. And so many people start running on their own computer. And I mean, I understand, like you said, the excitement is there. It's phenomenal demoware. I see a lot of people thrilled for setting up their optimal setup for this little assistant that's going to run. And I've yet to see someone who's like, it saved me X amount of hours per day on my actual job or actually move the needle forward. But I'm optimistic. I know that we can put it together, but I think people just need to get in the habit of spinning up their own, getting used to it. And a lot of the technologies you've talked about are going to enable that. One quick little question. N8N, do you self-host that as well?
Yeah, of course.
Nice. Are there any tools you like? And you mentioned Claude, but any specific tools that are not self-hosted that you think are just better from the cloud offering, or just not open source hasn't caught up to the proprietary equivalent?
Yeah, for sure. I'd say one that's like especially painful is docs. So, I think we use OpenOffice, and it's painful. Like it is not, it's not a good time. Google, like G Suite and Office 365 are so much better. The primary problem being just the snappiness of the UI. So like the worst thing about OpenOffice or LibreOffice or any of these open source alternatives is just that they are not nearly performant enough, the in-browser collaborative versions. But then on top of that, they're like not featureful enough. So there's like an open source spreadsheet project that I think is really promising called IronCalc, that's implemented in Rust. And I think it compiles to WASM. And so it's actually really snappy and nice, but it's like missing basically all of the features of Excel that powered users would use, right? Like I don't think it doesn't even have collaborative editing right now. So like once they implement collaborative editing and the like standard keyboard commands that Excel power users have, and like just the basic functions that you use like by default in Excel, we'll probably actually transition to that, because the snappiness of the UX is just such a pain point in OpenOffice. But yeah, I'd say Office software is by far the most painful thing to be stubbornly open source about.
Yeah, and I'm Team Obsidian through and through. I recommend to a lot of people, but the collaborative aspect is just not there. I forget what the sync is, but it's a matter of seconds rather than milliseconds. So you're typing something, all of a sudden everything your coworker works just jumps into the middle and you lose some stuff. So still work to do there, I agree. But at least these problems are becoming more approachable. Like you said, being able to do a Rust port or something, or a Go port if it's a web service, is becoming more and more trivial, where you don't necessarily need this experience. You can just have an idea, get inspiration from code, use a tool like DeepWiki from Cognition, where you can get a deep understanding of a code base and just say, I want this done in Go, and then it can just go off and do it. So hopefully more people start approaching these usability things.
I think you can get to a point where you have a prototype with that methodology. But then the difference between that and something that's like snappy and production ready, I actually don't think that language models are a massive value add in that respect. Like just pulling a number out of my my derriere, I would say like, maybe we're like 30 to 50% more productive in that like production level coding with language model assistance today. So it's not like a night and day difference compared to the old days, but definitely getting to the point where you have like a prototype in the new languages. It's like and the speed up of like 10 to 100x. So
yeah, 0 to 1 is absolutely trivial these days.
This guy that's working with me on Greyhaven, Corey Allen, did this talk called "The Cure to the Vibe Coding Hangover," and it's like, to me, that's the best word for it that I've ever heard. It's like I feel like every high performing engineer that I've met that goes through this thing where they like get into language model assisted coding and they feel like they're like invincible. And they're like, I've never been so productive in my life. It's incredible. I'm like Superman. And I was literally saying these kinds of things to people like a year ago. And then you inevitably crash when you realize that like there are all these little hard to describe things that are wrong with what I end up doing. But the thing that makes it especially difficult is that you lose track of what the language model's done. Like there's something about the process of working through the problems yourself that builds the mental model. And so when you have the language model doing a lot of that stuff for you, you lose the mental model of what's been done. And then the language model does a lot of subtle things badly. But then you don't have nearly the same kind of mental model of what's wrong with it and what it should have done. If you're using it in this like power user way where, like the closer you are to vibe coding, the less you're able to manage the code that you've written. Right. And then it turns out that, that like managing of the code is actually the vast majority of the work. Right. It's funny, getting to the point where you have like a working prototype is actually being able to get to a place where you have a working prototype of something is actually like a bit of a game changer, I find, in a lot of contexts. But then it's very easy to like project the superpower that you have in prototyping into the future and imagine that you're going to be able to like maintain all this code and, make it production ready at a similar kind of speed up, but it's not even close, right? It's not even in the same universe of speed up, right? All that's to say, I agree that porting things to like Rust or Go is like way easier than it used to be because you can get started really quickly. And also the language model is really good at helping you learn new things. Like that's a thing that I think is underrated about language models is like, I remember the first time I tried to write Rust, and this is like in the early days of Rust where the error messages didn't make any sense. And I remember running into a compiler error that was just undocumented. It was just like ER302 or something. And it's just like, I go to look up what is this, and it just hasn't been documented yet. And it's like the borrow checker is like, it's tough to wrap your head around what that's doing, right? The first time you encounter it. And so language models are incredible at this, right? Like the language model will almost always find the person who explained this really well on the internet and regurgitate their explanation in like just, but like custom to your context. And it's an incredible teacher. And so it like super, super lowers the barrier, right? To entry, to porting something to Rust. But I also think that people underestimate the amount of work involved in maintaining an open source project. It's not like you just wave the magic wand and suddenly things work, right?
Yeah, the one common use I've found it struggles with is when, especially the point in time where my code base has reached now with box one, add a new feature, do something like that, and it'll follow a completely different pattern than the rest of the code. And I have to remind it, like, observe, read the readmes, like get these rules. And I make sure to document the readmes as we go. So are these sources of truths, but they won't always reference it. It might just like go off a different path. So it is keeping a steady eye on things. And when people talk about firing off, 50 PRs an hour or having, a dozen agents running, I've never been able to get that to work. Once you pass 3 agents for me, it becomes, maybe it's the developer background. I need more control in it. Like I need to make sure it's going because we're not doing the prototype stage. This is a real system in production that real people are using, and it's important to keep it, functioning. One thing I wanted to pivot to slightly, when you talk about using it for your AI in your personal life, I think that's so many phenomenal use cases that you can do with that. I think it can help people improve their health, improve their relationships. There's so many aspects that it can provide, help you identify blind spots and give you good insights. One thing that contrasts that is how often people say, oh, it was so creepy. I was talking to so-and-so about X. I started getting ads for X. And I'm like, either the microphone's listening to you creepy, or even creepier, the algorithm knows you so well, it's predicting what you're interacting about before it even happens. And people kind of have the, oh, that's so awful moment, but they're not applying the same to AI. They're not thinking that OpenAI and Anthropic are building these profiles on every single user, not just about what you do about your day, but your psychological triggers and ways to like maximally gain your attention or your interactions. So by leveraging things like OpenAI, or open source AI or local AI, you're able to kind of mitigate that one risk. What type of things does Greyhaven work to alleviate in the creepy or the data control avenues?
I think that what you just said is right. And I think the same thing applies to a business, right? Like, at the very beginning of the ChatGPT sort of like explosion, you saw all these people coming up with their like custom chat GPT kind of wrapper businesses, right? And then OpenAI saw that all these people were doing this, and then they created the like, I don't even remember what the name of it was, because it was so short-lived, but it was like the equivalent of their like app store, right? Where they basically just like pulled the rug on every person who was excitedly building a ChatGPT wrapper type application. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, I was like, I hope businesses are watching, because this is what's going to happen to your business if you build a hard dependency on a company like OpenAI, right? They are ruthless. They are not in the business of, doing a public good, despite whatever their charter says. Like, they're very obviously, coming from this like Microsoft school of business where it's all about creating dependencies on them and then leveraging those dependencies to their economic advantage, right? And if you're not careful as a business about how you define the workflows that your business depends on, you are going to abstract yourself away as a business, right? You're basically think about what is a business if not the sum of all of the interactions between the people who run the business, right? Maybe you have some physical assets too, right? The like physical assets, the capital, the CapEx type stuff. But then you have all the know-how for that is like the accumulation of all the knowledge inside of your organization. And if you are effectively outsourcing that to third party who is very, very aggressively expanding and, is burning through tens of billions of dollars a year and needs to find a way to plug that leak, you are certainly not putting yourself in an advantage situation. Thinking of myself, like, I don't know if it's because I grew up playing poker for a living, and so I just naturally think about things from an adversarial game perspective. But like, it's as if all of these businesses are like, yeah, well, whatever. Like, this person promised they wouldn't raise, so I'm just going to show them my hand. And it's like, maybe you should not show them your hands. Like, you could do that instead. But you don't need to show them your hand. Yeah, okay, it's a little bit extra work, but like, you're probably going to be in a much better position in the next betting round if you don't just show them your hand right now. So yeah, for me, it's really about that. Like, you want to put yourself in a position to not be taken advantage of, or to continue to be competitive, right? Like, you're really giving away your competitive advantage if you are opening up all of the interactions between all of the people in your businesses, in all cases, to a third party, right? Like, they have you by the, I don't know how peachy this podcast is, but they have you by the something. And, as a business, you generally don't want to put yourself in that position, right? And really, if you look at the general playbook of Silicon Valley, it's very much this, expand aggressively, burn capital, build dependencies on you as a business until you have a monopoly, until there isn't the competitive pressure anymore, and then maximally exploit those dependencies, right? Like that is the playbook, right? It's what Uber did. That's why it's not cheaper to take Uber than taxi anymore, right? If anything, it's more expensive than it used to be, because they burned tons of investor money to crowd out all of their competitors, and tons of taxi businesses went out of business. And then now, if you want to get a taxi, you are not, they don't have a complete monopoly, but they have like a very strong, they have a really strong market advantage, right? I think Uber is like, of all the Silicon Valley businesses, is probably not the best example to choose, because I always felt that their business their moat was not super defensible. But that is the playbook, right? That's certainly what they tried and have sort of kind of done, right? If you look at, there are other businesses where that's very much more the case. Like Google, for example, built this massive search monopoly and then jacked up the prices. And so as a quick aside, out of curiosity, my business partner and I tried to calculate what is the Google tax, like what is the cost of advertising, how much more expensive is it to advertise because of Google's monopoly? And it was very hard to estimate, because Google's search monopoly is like global, right? And so the methodology that we came up with was to look at Japan, because Japan is one of the few countries that is not dominated by Google, and actually search in Japan is split across a bunch of different actors. And I think the ad spend per capita in Japan, I believe, is something like somewhere between 20 and 40% lower compared to the rest of the world. And so maybe that's, maybe that's like an estimate to the cost of the monopoly, right? So like everybody's paying a 20 to 40% tax on ad spend because of the Facebook Google monopoly or duopoly. Maybe that's certainly I'm not an economist and we didn't publish this in any papers. But I couldn't find a single economic paper, and maybe I don't know how to look, actually estimated what the tax is. Like I for whatever reason, maybe it's just that I don't know how to speak economist, and so I didn't know its search term. But I really could not find a study that looked into this. So anyway, all I have to say, that is the playbook, right? And so if AI is really like a transformative technology in this way, and you're putting yourself in a position where you're completely dependent on this company that's subsidizing their compute until you build a complete dependence, and then what's going to happen, right? This is potentially the worst type of dependence you could possibly build as a business, right? So it's very short-sighted to sort of hand the keys to a third party with respect to your internal communication processes and your like critical business processes, right? So all I have to say, the point of Greyhaven, which is the business that I am founding to help mitigate this problem for businesses, is to build architecture, build your AI architecture in a way where you aren't creating this dependence, or you're at least resisting it the maximum you can, right? It's not to say that you shouldn't use Google models, right? It's not to say that you shouldn't use Claude Opus. Opus is a fantastic model, and right now they're in the subsidize everything phase of the Silicon Valley playbook, and in fact they are giving away tons of value. It's like Claude is an incredible product right now, especially taking into account the cost of it, right? And there's no question that I am getting way more than $200 worth of value out of my $200 a month max subscription. That being said, I also am not putting myself in a position where I'm completely dependent on this max subscription that I have, right? So that's the underlying philosophy.
Excellent. So, and could you dive a little more into detail? Is it just going to be like a harness to run local models or open source models, or what else would be part of that offering in order to alleviate this risk?
Okay, so there are a few pieces, right? So I talked a little bit about bringing together your data into an index, right? And everybody having their own index. So that's the first piece, right? The architecture to have an index of your different sources of data. And then the index should also include the proprietary sources of data, right? They should include anything that you would want to build AI workflows around, but that index should live on your machine, right? It should be you, the individual, who has your index. And we actually came to that conclusion through a bit of trial and error. Like the first version that we built was much more of like a traditional kind of centralized database, and everybody had access permissions. The problem with that design is that you then need to reinvent permissions for everything that you use, right? And so any application that has its own like permissions and security model, your AI central data index then needs to somehow borrow whatever abstractions they're using and apply them to each user that's using your AI applications. And so if every user instead just has their own index, and that index is an index of the data that they already have access to, you've just skipped over the whole, we need to rewrite all the permission systems problem. That's the first piece, right? It is everybody should just have their own personal index. We built a bunch of integrations into a bunch of different systems. And then, there are abstractions that we built, and then you embed, and we have hybrid, like RAG plus traditional search and like tool use search and blah, blah, blah. You built these data access layer basically, right? So that's one piece. The second is the kind of like the DevOps layer, right? Like how do we host our own systems? And not every business necessarily needs that. Maybe they're perfectly happy using whatever SaaS products that they currently use, and they don't want to host anything, and that's fine. we've built our system in a way that's abstracted away, right? And it's about choice, right? This is the idea, right? Like you build a platform where it gives the user the choice to, hey, I'm going to use my own hosted version of the system, or I'm going to connect to this SaaS business, and that's fine. And if I ever get to the point where I don't want to use that SaaS system, I can swap it out. And the fact that you can swap it out, right, is that's the business leverage that you need as a business, right? It's the ability to say, hey, we're going to switch to this other provider, right? That's the thing that gives you your market leverage, and you need that. That's the second piece. The third piece is the sandbox environment, right? And so how do we lock down the things that are running in a way where we give them exactly the capabilities that they need, and we design those capabilities in a way that doesn't create security problems? And I'll say honestly, like that is a piece that is sorely missing from the ecosystem right now. We built this all in-house ourselves because it doesn't exist, right? We have tried so many solutions. I swear there's another agent sandbox toolkit on GitHub every week. There's another one, but they're all built for this narrow case of, I want to spin out an agent and have the agent be able to execute code inside of a sandbox environment such that activity is contained, right? But that's not a holistic solution. That is that's a solution to an individual agent execution problem, right? So then you need to build all the orchestration around that, and you need to figure out, but what permissions do I give it, right? And why do I give it those permissions, and et cetera, right? That's the sandbox piece, right? The security kind of guardrails. Actually, I shouldn't use the word guardrails, because guardrails mean a specific thing in AI world, and that's not what it is. Then there's the network egress system. So, within the confines of the sandbox, the AI application can do whatever it wants, but then it's going to want to talk to the outside world, right? And there are going to be kind of three main ways that it wants to connect to the outside world. There's going to be, hey, I want to go get information from the internet. So I want to do like a read type query. Those are slightly tricky because you can exfiltrate data and get queries by mistake. The second one is, hey, I want to talk to a language model, and the language model is going to tell me, I'm going to send it some context, and it's going to return some kind of response based on the context that I send it. That, to me, that's a part that's very difficult to get right, because you are kind of working against the interests of the model providers. They're all trying to lock you in. And so building a system that allows you to choose the right model for the right circumstance at any time is actually quite a bit more annoying than it would be if there were like a nice, perfect competition out there. And by the way, OpenRouter is not a complete solution to what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, hey, I want my call to the language model to be logged. I want it to be transparent. I want the right model to be chosen automatically for me without me having to, manually choose which one's appropriate under which contexts, right? And then I also want something that to be monitoring all of those calls and say, hey, the language model returns something that looks an awful lot like prompt injection. Let's be careful here. Let's flag this for review. And then maybe, you want to have something that's periodically looking at a random sample of all of the model queries that go through and checking to make sure that the queries that it's sampling conform to whatever rules you want to put into place. The last kind of thing that it can do is like a write query, right? Where it's going out and it's making some change to the world. And that's the most dangerous thing that it can do if it's also connected to a language model. And so you need to think very carefully in those contexts about what kind of permission and under what context, right? And so you, as much as possible, you want those write permission type things to be special permissions, right? That application has, not you, the user. It's like a special one just for the agent. And that's always logged, and you have control over the system that it's changing, so that you can go back and audit it and make sure that, hey, this thing that the model did was what it was supposed to. And this is a downside of using a lot of SaaS solutions, is that, the SaaS solutions aren't going to be designed in a way that really facilitates that pattern. But, on the other hand, there are, of course, many advantages to using SaaS solutions in general. So that's not to say that generally you shouldn't use them. So I talked about the egress control, right? I talked about the sandboxing, the data indexing, and the kind of like DevOps application layer. I think that's like more or less the complete picture of what we have. And then we have, we've got some like extra kind of tooling-y stuff and experiments that we're doing. Like right now we're trying to get to the point where, for example, we have our, our video calling platform that we built, and we connect that to our internal data sources. And then we have, our coding workflows, and we have like a platform that allows us to spin up an execution environment with Cloud Code or Open Code or whatever. We're trying to get to the point now where we have, specific design patterns that we dictate, and then access to, the data index, and you can get on a call and you can talk about like a feature that you wish existed. And then you can get like a kind of prototype of that feature delivered to you during the call. So you can be like, oh yeah, okay, cool. This is what I meant, or like, not quite. Let's adjust this in this way. So that's the dream that we're trying to chase right now. When everything is all interconnected, you can, just be live vibe coding with all of these connected cell phone tools, and modifying your personal workflow to your heart's content, basically.
So much I could dive into there, but I just wrote down a couple things just to get a couple questions, just to try to, dive in a little bit deeper. For that layer that audits input for the potential for prompt injection or just malicious intent in general. Since LLM struggle at separating instructions from data, you can easily put data that represents instructions that can steer it on the wrong path. The solution I've implemented with some success, depending on what the trade-offs are going to be, is just adding an extra call to a light model, 4.0 mini, haiku, one of the smaller scale ones, with the entire payload, and just say like, respond binary, yes or no, is this malicious? Or is there like potential for malicious there? And then just have that kind of be a gate check. Have you found there to be a more efficient solution? Because it does add latency, it does add cost, and the results are decent, but not like bulletproof.
No, that's pretty much what we do. And it's like a pretty, low effort, easy way to mitigate it. There are some companies that specialize in this, but they're not like open source owned solutions. I haven't gotten to the point yet where I've had conversation. I talked to a couple last year, and they just weren't, what they offered wasn't moving the needle significantly. I do think that this is like an open area of research right now. Unfortunately, the big model providers, their philosophy is, oh, we're just going to have the model be better and therefore never be like, Anthropic puts a lot of work into making sure that its model is not going to do malicious things, right? And they're like, yeah, that's the only way you could ever do it, which to me is, it's very self-serving that's the philosophy that they have from a systems design perspective. That is almost certainly wrong. It's certainly not the way that you should do it. You should have like a red team, blue team set up for sure. That being said, to me, the important thing is to set up your architecture such that it is easy to plug in whatever solution you need, right? And so like if you have this control layer where all of the data is flowing through a single choke point, you can put whatever you want there, right? And if that is a call to a smaller model that just says, is this malicious? That can be your solution until somebody comes out with, somebody writes a paper at Nila or whatever that says like, hey, we spent, the past 6 months working on this problem, and we have this custom model like that's specifically designed for, prompt injection detection, and, slap that on the end of your, LLM calls, and Bob's your uncle. That's to me it's what's important is designing your system in a way where the architecture allows for that system of control.
Yep. Modularity is super important, be able to plug and play, because we're only going to get more open source solutions and more robust approaches. So we just got to make sure we can plug them in when they're available. The other area I'm curious about is the orchestration, the automatically call the correct model. I know there's a company out there, not Diamond, where you can train a model that will route. But again, that's giving a company all like a meaningful data set of ideally real interactions you've had. I'm not comfortable doing that. So I always have hard-coded heuristics as to when to route to another one. Not automatic, not scalable. It's pretty grimy, but it does at least alleviate some costs and improve speed. Do you have any insights to how to improve orchestration of multiple models depending on the request?
That is also what we do. So we do it through hard-coded rules, and we say, hey, these types of situations, or we're going to use this kind of model, and these other types of situations, we're going to use these other kinds of models. And that's it. And it's simple. And honestly, I did talk to Not Diamond last year about this. I asked them, they had actually open sourced one of their router models. And so I contacted them about using their open source router model. And they were telling me that they actually had been sort of pivoting, and that they were seeing a lot more traction on doing basically what GSPI does, right? So like this kind of like RLHF like fine tuning and post hoc. And so they were really much less focused on this routing problem. Then, OpenAI came along and was like, yeah, we're just going to slap a router in front of all of our models and call it GPT-5. And so if you're using ChatGPT, there's a router under the hood that's doing that already. I think if you want to set up something like that internally, like I actually think it's quite possible. I talked to somebody at, I want to say it was Writer AI, who told me that he had worked on fine tuning NVIDIA NeMo to act as an internal router for model selection, for like task specific model connection. We don't have like the scale internally ourselves to where that's like necessary. The data privacy concern tends to be the dominant factor. Like we just sort of have we have 3 tiers, right? We have model that's running on the host machine or running, on wherever the inside of the sandbox, let's say, right? Then we have the second tier, which is model running on our owned architecture, like where we've rented a GPU node, and we're running our own open source model on that. So like right now, Kimi K2.5, it seems to be really by far the best. I've actually been really, really impressed with Kimi K2.5's performance, but this changes every week. Like it was Mistral for like 4 days, and then it became DeepSeek again. And so we're constantly testing, right? We have all this infrastructure as code stuff set up to spin up big models on GPU nodes and run them at competitive levels of TPS throughput. And we're constantly testing to see which model is the best performing model. And we basically host one big high performing general purpose language model at all times. We have like a bunch of smaller models that we're running at all times for various like specific uses, but those are all like specific to those workflows, right? And it's always using that model. It doesn't need to be routed. And then of course we have connections to Anthropic and OpenAI and Google or whatever for all the like top lab models basically. And the best model, I mean, for coding, it has been consistently Anthropic for quite a while now. And then for like general purpose, I actually find the different models kind of have their own different personalities. And so being able to switch between them manually is like really nice when I'm doing like interactive kind of work. And so actually the fact that I have that ability to like swap between models in a ChatGPT like interface is really nice. But that's manual. It's not automatic. So the way in which it's automatic is really programmed into the rules of the systems that we build. So it says, we have like, it's just classified as like, this is a private workflow. And so it runs on a local model. And okay, this is like a company private workflow. And so it runs on our self-hosted model, but within the context of the company VPC. And then, and then this workflow is just whatever, like we don't care. And so this is allowed to touch whatever.
Last question for me. You mentioned K2.5. My current go-to that I have running here is GLM 4.7. And I mean, the naming is just getting terrible. But have you been able to test, and do you have any recommendations for different models for different use cases? Because you mentioned sometimes people will run one locally, then you have your bigger one. Have you found like a general landscape for this short snapshot in time as to what some people should check out for different use cases?
So as of right now, we're recording February 16th, 2026.
It'll be different when it's released.
Like seriously, could be different next week. As of today, GLM 4.7 Flash is just better than everything else for running on like a local GPU. I mean, if you can run a model that large. If you cannot, there are a bunch of models that are in like a similar kind of ballpark of each other. And I just recommend you like try them and get a feel for it. Like you can install, like if you're new to self-hosting, Ollama really lowers the barrier. You can just download Ollama, download whatever models you think are cool and interesting sounding. Make sure that you understand how much VRAM you have and understand that there are two kinds of models you can run. You can either run a model that's a mixture of experts model where the number of billion, like like for example, if it's a 30-4B, right? That means 4 billion parameters are going to be active at any time. You need to make sure that you have more than 4 gigabytes of VRAM on your GPU, or it's gonna be insanely slow. If you can fit the whole model onto your GPU, that's better. And so if you've got like a commercial, gamer type GPU that has like 16 or 24 or even 32 gigabytes of RAM, that's great. You can run GLM 4.7 flash completely on the GPU locally. That's you're gonna get like pretty decent token throughput on that. You can really just experiment with the different models and try them out and see how they feel. In my personal experience, I can't stand the Quen models. The Quen models seem to all do really well, all the benchmarks, and then I use them in practice and I find them to be awful. I find that they all are very, very, they like blabber on and on. They like take way too many words to respond to anything. I have the Google small models, the Gemma like family. I find them pretty good, but they are like overly safety maxed or whatever, in that they like often decline to answer questions that they really shouldn't be declining to answer. And so they're like a little bit annoying to use for that reason. And then there's like a long tail of other companies that do open models that are pretty good. You can't go wrong with Mistral. Like Mistral has been quite good. Mistral is better than they look on benchmarks, I would say, in general. Like I think they're one of these companies that clearly isn't trying that hard to be the best at the benchmarks. Like Anthropic is like this too. Anthropic is always better than they look on the benchmarks. So yeah, if you just pick like, pick up try Mistral, try GLM, try there's like a Minimax or whatever. I think it's one of them. I didn't really like the OpenAI released a couple open source models at one point. I found them to be way worse than advertised in practice. But yeah, they all have sort of their different feels. And then with the big models, it changes every week. DeepSeek has been consistently good. Like I would say, there has never been a time when DeepSeek was a bad choice as a like large model. If you can host a full node, like you could just stick to whatever the latest version of DeepSeek is, and it's going to be pretty close to the best open model at any given time. Mistral has consistently been like close to the top, but I would say they're better at the. I'd say the Mistral models tend to be better at the like kind of administrative and like interactive type stuff than at the like they tend to be pretty bad at like tool use, I would say, and coding they're like kind of mediocre, I would say, compared to the Chinese models. Chinese models, I'd say just as a group, the Chinese models tend to be pretty decent. And then generally speaking, they're the best for like engineering use cases as like a country. I kind of tend to group them in my head, but they're actually kind of different. Like Quen is like Quen generally feels very benchmark maxed to the point where they're in practice like way worse than they look when you look at artificial analysis or whatever. DeepSeek, on the other hand, I find is generally quite good. The problem, of course, with DeepSeek though is just that it's just so beefy that you need an entire H200 node to like run it, right? Which most people cannot afford. We have infrastructure set up to spin up, instances on demand, and even then, it's like when you're paying. It comes out to something like $20 an hour, right, to run this model, which is it's like having an extra employee basically, which I think is worth it, but it's a lot to pay if you're a small business or just an individual. And then what have I not mentioned? That GLM has been really good for a while. GLM is really nice because they're not. I'd say in practice they're not quite as good as the benchmark suggests. Like I think GLM 4.7 was like the best model according to artificial analysis in the open space, and I don't think it was. Like according to our internal evaluations, DeepSeek was still better, but it was like half the size, and so you could run it on like significantly fewer GPUs. Like you could get like a half a node and run GLM 4.7, and that it just is like a big difference in cost, and it's like almost as good. And so I quite liked it. We were using GLM as our daily driver for a while, but now K 2.5 is, I would say, a step ahead of all of the other open models right now. Like I was pretty blown away. It feels like maybe Sonnet 4.2-ish. Just, that's a total vibe evaluation, but it's like, it feels like it's almost as good as the top lab models of like a couple months ago. And so it's very good, like very, very performant. Even, in fact, I gave it a content creation task, and I felt like we had better response than I get out of OpenAI, which I was blown away by. Like I could not believe that it did that. But yeah, I gave it a call transcript and said like, hey, come up with some like examples of blog articles we might write based on this technical conversation we just had, and it gave me like legit good suggestions, which language models usually don't do. Like even the best models often are pretty bad at that. So yeah, that's my overview of the state of open models, February 16, 2026. But I swear I change my opinion on a weekly basis. Like, that, no joke. Like next week there will probably be a new model that drops that's better than K 2.5.
Yeah, and what a wild time to be alive. And like you said, people just have to kind of build it into it themselves and play with it. Another thing to make sure is like test in the way you'll use it, because you said some models do better for interpersonal stuff, some are better for coding. Tool use is actually something where they deviate meaningfully on, where you can get a model that seems really good, but if you can't call tools, you're eliminating so much potential out of there.
Yes. And I actually, just on that point real quick, like the tool use is so different from all the rest of the stuff that I have been thinking about maybe separating those two use cases. Like maybe if we scale up a little bit bigger as a business, we can run two major models, and we'll pin the best tool use, and we'll have like separate evals. Because right now what we have is we have like a suite of evaluations that we run, and then we test how, every time there's a new model, we hook it up to a bunch of different agents, and then we run the agents with these tasks, and then we check whether like we're able to complete the tasks. And anytime somebody has a task that's like, that they expected a model to be able to do and it wasn't able to do it, we just add it to the test suite, right? So we have this like growing over time suite of things that we think are like on the borderline of what models could do. And then we just run all the different models against this suite of tasks and form this opinion based on our own internal, like actual real world applications. The ability to correctly call out the tools and use them the right way is something that like only Sonnet was able to do a year ago. Like literally it was Sonnet and nothing else. And, there were all these other models that were like claiming to be able to do tool use, and none of them could. Whereas now kind of all of the top open models can do it better than Sonnet could last year, right? Like, which is crazy. But yeah, it's still a huge difference. Like the degree to which Opus is able, like Claude's 4.5 Opus, the degree to, or it's 4.6 now, isn't it? The degree to which 4.6 Opus is able to correctly call the right tool and use it in a way that is not dumb, is a big, like there's a big gap between that and the rest of the models. And that is by far the biggest gap that's noticeable, I would say. But like the rest of the models have a bit like, I don't know, for a while, back when Facebook was a serious contender in the AI space, their models had like this very kind of playful personality. For example, you could tell that they were trained on a lot of social media, right? They had this sort of like, they were like less serious, less professional, more like kind of playful as models. I would actually say that difference is less noticeable now. The models have converged a bit in terms of like the style, the output style. But they definitely have different strengths and weaknesses. Like, it's getting harder and harder to describe what those are. Like you sort of have to try them and you get like an intuition. Like I like, if I have a thing that I need to do, I often have like a pretty good idea of which model is going to give me the best output, but I'm less and less able to describe what exactly those like heuristics are that I'm using.
Max, this was a blast. Love the work that you're doing. Love that you're turning Greyhaven into a thing. Before I let you go, is there anything you want the audience to know?
I want the audience to know that you can host your own Git with Git and that you can host your own spreadsheets with IronCalc, and you can host your own chat with Zulip, and you can host your own Notion with Affine, and you can host your own calendar with cal.com, and you can run all of this on Coolify with like Light LLM as your router. And there are open source, like there are really good open source alternatives to almost everything right now that are super worth trying. And it's very easy to do. It's not the pain in the butt that it used to be. And so if you want to build a business that owns all of its own processes, I think that that's going to be a big advantage going into the future. And so I encourage you to go out and try it.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Max McCrea. These are very important conversations for me because, as I'm sure you know by now, I'm a huge advocate for open source AI. Without hyperbole, I genuinely believe open source AI is the key to a positive future for humanity. Rather than relying on AI that we rent, it'll be AI that we own, AI that we control, allowing us to have sovereignty over our private data. We don't want to give everything away because, as Max said, our businesses are processes and knowledge, and if we offload that to these AI companies, what do we really have as a moat? I hope you enjoy this conversation. I'll see you next week.